The hunting grounds of Kalara stretched across 3 moons, each one carved from solid obsidian and shaped by generations of her ancestors. Alpha Matriarch Zarathek stood 7 feet tall, her silver fur rippling with muscle beneath the pale light of the twin suns. Her eyes burned amber, and when she moved, every warrior in her pack instinctively stepped aside. She had earned her position through blood and cunning, and she had held it for 12 cycles by being more ruthless than any male who dared challenge her authority. The arena floor was still warm with the blood of her latest suitor. Prince Korvac of the Crimson Nebula lay in pieces, his ornate courtship armor scattered like broken promises across the polished stone. He had been the 17th male to seek her hand this cycle, and like the 16 before him, he had learned too late that Zarathek did not simply choose a mate. She tested them, and her tests were always fatal. "Clear the arena," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power. The lesser wolves of her pack scrambled to obey, dragging away the remains while trying not to meet her gaze. Fear and respect walked hand in hand in the Moonborn hierarchy, and Zarathek wielded both like the curved blades at her hips. Her lieutenant, Vex High, approached with careful steps. Even he, her most trusted warrior, moved like prey in her presence. Alpha Matriarch, the Council of Elders, requests an audience. They grow concerned about the succession. Zarathek's lips pulled back, revealing fangs designed to tear through bone and spirit alike. "Let them be concerned. I will choose when I choose, and who I choose, not before." She turned away from the blood-stained arena, her massive form moving with predatory grace toward her private chambers. "Send word to every corner of the galaxy. The Alpha Matriarch of the Moonborn still seeks a worthy mate. Let them come and test themselves against my strength." The chambers of the Alpha Matriarch occupied the highest tower of the fortress city, carved directly into the mountain face of Kalara Prime. Ancient tapestries depicted the conquests of her lineage, showing Moonborn warriors bringing entire star systems to heel. Weapons from 1,000 defeated enemies lined the walls, each one a trophy from her personal victories. This was her domain, and she ruled it absolutely. But even absolute power came with burdens. The Moonborn Empire stretched across 400 systems, each one protected by the strength of her pack and the fear her name inspired in their enemies. For 3 centuries, her people had been the apex predators of this arm of the galaxy, and that position required constant vigilance. It also required heirs. The genetic line of the Alpha Matriarchs carried traits that made them superior to ordinary Moonborn. Enhanced senses, reflexes that bordered on precognitive, and physical strength that could crush steel with bare hands. But these gifts only passed from mother to daughter, and only when the mother mated with a male strong enough to survive the bonding process. Most males died during courtship. Those who survived the courtship rarely lived through the mating itself. And in 400 years of Alpha Matriarchs, only 17 daughters had been successfully born. Zarathek was the last of her line. The pressure to produce an heir grew heavier with each passing cycle, but she refused to lower her standards. Better to let the empire fall than to dilute the sacred bloodline with weakness. A soft chime announced an incoming communication. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the weathered features of Admiral Krosk, commander of her Outer Rim fleets. His scarred muzzle and missing left eye spoke of decades spent in battle, and when he spoke, it was with the clipped precision of a career warrior. "Alpha Matriarch, we have detected an unknown vessel approaching the Kalara system. Single ship, small configuration, definitely not Moonborn design. It appears to be primitive." Zarathek moved closer to the display, her enhanced senses automatically analyzing what she could perceive through the feed. "Species? Unknown, but preliminary scans suggest it might be from one of the younger races. The ship's technology is at least 2 centuries behind our current standards. Shall I destroy it? No." The word came out sharper than she intended. Something about this situation intrigued her in ways she couldn't explain. "Escort it to the orbital platform. I want to see what manner of creature has the audacity to approach the heart of the Moonborn Empire, uninvited." Admiral Krosk's remaining eye widened slightly. In the 3 decades he had served her, the Alpha Matriarch had never shown interest in primitives before. As you command, Alpha Matriarch. The vessel should reach the platform within the hour. The communication ended, leaving Zarathek alone with her thoughts. Something stirred in the depths of her consciousness, an instinct she had never felt before. Her nostrils flared, as if trying to catch a scent that existed only in possibility. For the first time in cycles, she felt genuinely curious about something other than war or politics. An hour later, she stood in the observation deck of orbital platform Omega, watching as the primitive vessel was guided into the docking bay. The ship was indeed crude by Moonborn standards, all angles and inefficient design, but something about its construction suggested the builders understood the fundamentals of engineering, even if they lacked advanced materials. It spoke of a species that solved problems through ingenuity rather than raw technological superiority. The airlock cycled, and Zarathek found herself leaning forward despite her usual composure. The first figure to emerge was clearly the pilot, and the sight of him stopped her breath entirely. He was smaller than any Moonborn male, probably no more than 6 feet tall, with pale skin and dark hair that fell across strange, forward-facing eyes. But what struck her wasn't his appearance. It was his scent. Even through the environmental barriers and across the distance of the observation deck, his scent reached her with impossible clarity. It carried notes she had never encountered before. Determination without desperation, courage without foolishness, and underneath it all, something that made every instinct in her body sing with recognition. This was not the scent of prey or predator. This was the scent of an equal. Her claws extended involuntarily, scraping against the reinforced observation window. Around her, the other Moonborn in the deck unconsciously stepped back as her pheromones shifted from mere authority to something far more primal and dangerous. This human, this impossible creature from a species she had never heard of, had just triggered responses in her body that had been dormant for her entire life. "Who is he?" she whispered, though the question was directed more at the universe than at her companions. Commander Thane, who had been reviewing the preliminary scans, consulted his datapad with nervous efficiency. The ship's identification beacon lists him as Captain Marcus Chen of the Terran Federation, long-range explorer, currently on what their records call a first contact mission. He paused, clearly struggling with some aspect of the data. Alpha Matriarch, according to their star charts. This federation controls only 12 systems, and their most advanced technology appears to be roughly equivalent to what we were using 300 years ago. Zarathek's amber eyes never left the human as he moved through the docking bay below, apparently unaware that he was being observed by the most dangerous predator in known space. His movements were efficient and confident, showing none of the nervous energy she would expect from a primitive meeting advanced civilization for the first time. He examined his surroundings with the careful attention of someone who understood that details could mean the difference between life and death. But his posture remained relaxed and ready. "He came here alone?" she asked. "Completely alone, Alpha Matriarch. No escorts, no backup fleet, no apparent weapons beyond basic defensive systems. Either he's incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." As she watched the human pilot secure his vessel and begin what appeared to be post-flight procedures, Zarathek felt something shift in the deepest core of her being. For 28 years, she had been the Alpha Matriarch, absolute ruler of the most powerful empire in this arm of the galaxy. She had faced down rebellions, conquered star systems, and personally killed anyone who threatened her authority. She had never met her equal, never encountered anyone who could stand in her presence without flinching or submitting. But this human, this Marcus Chen, moved through her territory with the unconscious confidence of someone who belonged wherever he chose to be, and his scent, carried on recycled air and filtered through environmental systems, still reached her with crystal clarity. It spoke to parts of her genetic code that had been waiting her entire life for recognition. "Prepare a formal reception," she commanded, her voice carrying a tone that made every warrior in the observation deck snap to attention. "I will meet with this Captain Chen personally." Commander Thane's scarred features showed barely controlled alarm. "Alpha Matriarch, perhaps it would be more appropriate to have Admiral Krosk conduct the initial contact." We know nothing about this species' customs or capabilities. It could be dangerous to expose yourself to potential contamination or attack. Zarathek turned her amber gaze on him, and he immediately dropped his eyes in submission. Commander, are you suggesting that I, Alpha Matriarch of the Moonborn Empire, conqueror of the Helix Nebula, destroyer of the Thakari fleet, should fear a single primitive in an obsolete ship? No, Alpha Matriarch. Of course not. I merely thought. You thought incorrectly. She moved toward the exit, her massive form flowing with deadly grace. Have Captain Chen escorted to Reception Chamber 7. Full honor guard, but no weapons drawn. And Commander? She paused at the doorway, not bothering to look back. If anyone harms him before I have the chance to evaluate his worth personally, I will feed them to the arena beasts, piece by piece. As she made her way through the corridors of the orbital platform toward the reception chambers, Zarathek tried to analyze what was happening to her body's responses. Her enhanced metabolism had shifted into a state she had never experienced before. Her senses were operating at peak efficiency, her reflexes were hair-trigger ready, and her pheromone production had ramped up to levels that were making every Moonborn she passed either flee in terror or drop to their knees in instinctive submission. This was not the physiological response of a predator preparing to hunt. This was something else entirely, something her genetic memory recognized even though her conscious mind had never encountered it before. This was the response of an alpha matriarch who had finally detected the scent of a potential true mate. The realization should have been disturbing. This human was from a primitive species, technologically inferior and physically smaller than even the weakest Moonborn male. By every logical standard, he should be beneath her notice. But logic had no power over the ancient genetic programming that was currently flooding her system with hormones and battle-ready energy. Reception Chamber 7 was the most formal space on the orbital platform, designed to impress visiting dignitaries and potential enemies alike. Carved from a single massive crystal and furnished with trophies from successful campaigns, it projected the power and sophistication of the Moonborn Empire, while providing clear evidence of what happened to those who opposed them. It was also equipped with the finest environmental systems available, which meant she would be able to properly analyze this human's scent without interference. She settled into the Alpha's chair, a throne carved from the hull of the first dreadnought she had personally destroyed, and waited. Around the chamber, her honor guard took their positions with professional efficiency. These were her finest warriors, each one capable of reducing an ordinary enemy to component atoms before they could draw breath to scream. Today, they would serve as witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. The chamber doors opened with ceremonial precision, and Captain Marcus Chen entered flanked by two guards who looked distinctly uncomfortable with their orders not to restrain the alien visitor. Zarathek's first close look at him confirmed what her enhanced senses had already told her. This was no ordinary primitive. He moved into the chamber with the casual confidence of someone who had faced the unknown before and survived. His clothing was practical rather than ceremonial, clearly designed for function over appearance. But it was clean and well-maintained. His forward-facing eyes swept the chamber with professional assessment, cataloging potential threats and escape routes without appearing nervous or hostile. When his gaze finally settled on her, he neither flinched nor submitted. Instead, he smiled. "Your Imperial Majesty," he said, offering a slight bow that managed to convey respect without submission. "I'm Captain Marcus Chen of the Earth ship Prometheus. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." His voice was steady and warm, carrying tones she had never heard before. But it was his scent that made her claws extend and her breath catch. Up close, without environmental barriers, it was even more intoxicating. It carried the sharp clarity of intelligence, the warm comfort of genuine courage, and underneath it all, something that made her genetic code sing with recognition and hunger. For the first time in her life, Alpha Matriarch Zarathek found herself at a complete loss for words. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with possibilities neither had anticipated. Marcus Chen stood in the center of Reception Chamber 7, completely unaware that the most dangerous predator in known space was currently experiencing a genetic awakening that hadn't occurred in her lineage for over a century. His calm demeanor and steady breathing suggested either remarkable courage or complete ignorance of his situation. Zarathek forced herself to speak, though her voice came out rougher than usual. "Captain Chen, You have traveled far from your home systems to reach Moonborn space. Explain your purpose here. Marcus reached into his jacket with slow, deliberate movements, clearly conscious that sudden gestures might be misinterpreted. He produced a small device that projected a holographic star chart above his palm. My people recently developed long-range sensor technology that detected the energy signatures of advanced civilizations in this region. I volunteered to make first contact and establish diplomatic relations. You volunteered to approach an unknown alien empire alone, in a primitive ship, with no weapons or backup support. Zarathek's amber eyes studied him with predatory intensity. This suggests either exceptional bravery or exceptional stupidity. Which is it, Captain? Probably both, Marcus admitted, with another of those warm smiles that seemed to bypass her conscious defenses entirely. But someone had to be first. My people believe that peaceful contact between species is possible, even when there are significant technological or cultural differences. I volunteered because I believe the potential benefits outweigh the risks. Around the chamber, her honor guard exchanged meaningful glances. The concept of approaching superior force without weapons or defensive positioning was so alien to Moonborn, thinking that several of them were having trouble processing it as anything other than elaborate suicide. But Zarathek was beginning to understand that this human operated according to entirely different principles. Your people sent you to negotiate with an empire that could destroy your entire civilization without noticeable effort, she said, leaning forward in her crystal throne. What could you possibly offer that would interest us? Knowledge, Marcus replied immediately. Perspective. Friendship. If you're interested. Every species develops unique solutions to universal problems. We might be primitive by your standards, but we've survived in a hostile galaxy through cooperation, innovation, and adaptation. Those aren't technologies you can build or conquer. They're philosophies you have to learn. His scent was doing something to her nervous system that made concentration increasingly difficult. Every breath brought fresh waves of that impossible compatibility signal, stronger now that he was relaxed and speaking passionately about something he believed in. Her enhanced metabolism was responding as if she were in the presence of a genetically perfect mate, despite the fact that interspecies breeding should have been biologically impossible. You speak of cooperation, she managed, fighting to maintain her composure while her body prepared for possibilities she couldn't acknowledge. Yet you come from a species I have never encountered. How do you know we are even capable of peaceful coexistence? Marcus gestured to the chamber around them. Because you agreed to meet with me instead of destroying my ship. Because your guards are alert but not threatening. Because you're asking questions instead of making demands. He paused, tilting his head slightly as he studied her massive form. And because something in your body language suggests you're as curious about me as I am about you. The observation was so accurate it made her breath catch. This primitive human was reading her subtle behavioral cues with an intuition that most Moonborn couldn't match. Either his species had evolved remarkable social intelligence, or there was something else at work here. Commander Thane, she said without taking her eyes off Marcus. Escort Captain Chen to guest quarters 12. See that he has everything he needs for an extended stay. I will require time to consider his proposal. Alpha Matriarch. Thane's voice carried carefully controlled concern. Perhaps it would be appropriate to conduct a full medical and security screening before. Did I ask for your opinion, Commander? The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees as her pheromones shifted toward the aggressive spectrum. Every Moonborn present instinctively lowered their heads in submission. But Marcus remained upright, watching the interaction with obvious interest. No, Alpha Matriarch. I will see to the guest quarters immediately. As the honor guard moved to escort Marcus from the chamber, he turned back toward her throne. Your Imperial Majesty, I hope our conversations continue. I have the feeling we have much to learn from each other. After they left, Zarathek remained motionless in her throne for several long minutes, trying to process what had just occurred. Her enhanced senses were still detecting trace amounts of his scent in the chamber's atmosphere, and her body's response was intensifying rather than fading. This was supposed to be impossible. Cross-species genetic compatibility was so rare it was considered mythical. And when it did occur, it was usually between closely related evolutionary lines. Humans and Moonborn had clearly evolved on different worlds under completely different conditions. There was no logical reason her genetic programming should be responding to him as a potential mate, but logic had no power over the increasingly urgent signals her body was sending. She activated her personal communicator, connecting directly to Dr. Kelvara, the Empire's leading geneticist, and the only person in the galaxy who might have answers to questions she couldn't ask directly. Alpha Matriarch, Dr. Kelvara's image, appeared in holographic form, her aged features showing the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to survive by being useful rather than political. How may I serve? Doctor, I need you to research human physiology and genetics, everything available in our databases, plus whatever you can extrapolate from remote scans of the visitor currently in our custody. Of course, Alpha Matriarch. Might I ask what specific aspects of human biology are of interest? Zarathek hesitated. The question she needed to ask would reveal things about her current condition that could be interpreted as weakness by potential rivals. But she needed answers more than she needed perfect security. I need to know if cross-species genetic compatibility is theoretically possible between humans and Moonborn. Full analysis, complete discretion, and I want results within 6 hours. Dr. Kelvara's expression remained carefully neutral, but Zarathek caught the slight widening of her eyes that suggested the request was as surprising as it was significant. I will begin immediately, Alpha Matriarch. Should I prepare breeding compatibility protocols as well? Not yet. Just the theoretical analysis for now. The communication ended, leaving Zarathek alone with thoughts that grew more chaotic by the moment. She was the Alpha Matriarch of the most powerful empire in this arm of the galaxy. She had conquered star systems, destroyed fleets, and personally killed anyone who challenged her authority. She had never met an equal, never encountered anyone who could stand in her presence without flinching. But this human, this Marcus Chen, had walked into her throne room and treated her like an equal worthy of respect rather than a superior demanding submission. And his scent, impossible though it was, continued to trigger responses that had been dormant her entire life. Guest Quarters 12 were located in the diplomatic section of the orbital platform, designed to house visiting dignitaries in comfort while maintaining appropriate security measures. They offered luxurious accommodations by galactic standards. But Zarathek found herself wondering if human requirements were different from the species they usually hosted. She made her way through the corridors toward the diplomatic section, telling herself she was simply ensuring their guest was properly accommodated. The fact that her enhanced senses were eagerly anticipating another encounter with his scent was irrelevant. The fact that her body was producing pheromones at levels that would overwhelm most males was coincidental. She was investigating a potential diplomatic asset, nothing more. The guard outside Quarters 12 straightened to attention as she approached. Alpha Matriarch, Captain Chen is currently reviewing technical specifications for the platform's environmental systems. He requested access to engineering data to better understand our technological capabilities. Of course, he was studying their technology. A primitive exploring advanced civilization would naturally want to understand what he was dealing with. But the fact that he was approaching it systematically rather than being overwhelmed by wonder suggested an intelligence she was beginning to respect. Has he made any requests or expressed any concerns? He asked if the quarters were equipped with communication systems that could reach his home planet. When I explained the distance made that impossible with his ship's technology, he seemed disappointed but not surprised. He also asked about local customs regarding guest behavior. Apparently, he wants to avoid inadvertent offense. Thoughtful and considerate. Another point in his favor, and another indication that his species had developed sophisticated social intelligence, despite their technological limitations. I will speak with him personally. Return to your regular duties. The guard departed with obvious relief. Most Moonborn found extended proximity to their Alpha Matriarch exhausting, as their instincts forced them into constant submission postures that wore down their energy reserves. Only her closest advisors and proven warriors could function normally in her presence for extended periods. She activated the door chime and waited for permission to enter, a courtesy she extended to very few beings in the galaxy. Marcus's voice called for her to come in, and she stepped through the threshold into quarters that suddenly felt much smaller than they had when she inspected them during construction. Marcus was seated at the room's workstation, surrounded by holographic displays, showing detailed schematics of the platform's various systems. He was making notes on a primitive tablet device, apparently translating the information into terms his own people could understand. When she entered, he stood and offered the same slight bow he had used in the reception chamber. "Your Imperial Majesty. Thank you for checking on me. These accommodations are far beyond anything I expected. And the technical data you've provided is fascinating. Your engineering principles are at least 2 centuries ahead of anything my people have developed." His scent hit her immediately, stronger in the confined space and unfiltered by environmental systems. Her enhanced senses cataloged it automatically: stress levels low, health excellent, emotional state curious and appreciative. And underneath it all, that impossible compatibility signal that made her genetic programming sing with recognition and hunger. "You study our technology to report to your people," she observed, moving closer to examine his work. "But you must realize that any information you gather here will be meaningless without the industrial base to implement it." "True," Marcus agreed easily. "But understanding the principles might help us ask better questions when we encounter similar challenges. And honestly, I'm curious about how you solved certain problems that we're still struggling with." He gestured toward a schematic showing the platform's artificial gravity generation system. "This design is elegant. It achieves complete gravitational normalization with minimal energy expenditure. Our current systems require massive power inputs to generate even basic artificial gravity." His enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. Zarathek found herself stepping closer, drawn by his obvious intelligence, and the way his excitement about learning seemed to override any concern about being alone with the most dangerous predator in known space. "The principle is based on localized space-time manipulation," she explained, surprised to find herself genuinely interested in sharing the knowledge. "Rather than generating gravitational force directly, we create small distortions in the fabric of space itself. The gravitational effect emerges naturally from the geometry." "Brilliant," Marcus breathed, making rapid notes on his tablet. "That explains the power efficiency. You're not fighting physics, you're redirecting it." He looked up at her, his forward-facing eyes bright with intellectual pleasure. "How did your people first discover this principle?" "It was developed during the third expansion, when our ships became large enough that traditional rotational gravity was insufficient. One of our physicists theorized that if gravity was a function of curved space-time, then artificial gravity should be achievable by creating controlled curvature." As she spoke, Zarathek realized she was enjoying this conversation more than she had enjoyed anything in cycles. Marcus asked intelligent questions, made insightful observations, and treated her technical knowledge with the respect it deserved. When was the last time anyone had engaged with her intellect rather than simply submitting to her authority? "Your physicist sounds like someone my people would have appreciated," Marcus said. "We have a saying. The best solutions usually come from working with natural forces instead of against them." He paused, studying her massive form with obvious curiosity. "Might I ask you a personal question?" "Your Imperial Majesty?" The request should have been presumptuous. No one asked personal questions of the Alpha Matriarch without explicit permission. But his tone was respectful and genuinely curious rather than invasive. "You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. You're clearly brilliant, and you obviously understand the technical aspects of your empire's achievements in detail. But from what I've observed, your people seem to expect you to function primarily as a military commander and political authority. Do you ever feel constrained by those expectations?" The question hit her like a physical blow. In 28 years as Alpha Matriarch, no one had ever asked her about her personal satisfaction with her role. The fact that this primitive human had identified the fundamental tension of her existence within hours of meeting her was both unsettling and remarkably perceptive. "The responsibilities of leadership require certain sacrifices," she said carefully. "Personal preferences must be subordinated to the needs of the Empire." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "But that doesn't really answer my question, does it? In my experience, the best leaders are those who find ways to serve their people's needs while still remaining true to themselves. When leaders become nothing but their roles, they tend to make decisions based on what's expected rather than what's actually right." His scent was overwhelming her ability to think clearly. Every breath brought fresh waves of that compatibility signal, stronger now that they were alone and engaged in genuine conversation. Her body was responding as if she were in the presence of a perfect genetic match, despite the biological impossibility of the situation. "Captain Chen," she said, her voice rougher than she intended. "You are either very brave or very foolish to speak so directly to someone who could kill you without effort." Marcus smiled, that warm, disarming smile that seemed to bypass all her defenses. "Probably both, like I said before, but I have the feeling that if you were going to kill me, you would have done it already. And honestly, I'm more interested in understanding you than in protecting myself from you." The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Zarathek found herself moving closer, drawn by his scent and his completely unprecedented lack of fear in her presence. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why are you interested in understanding me?" "Because you're fascinating," Marcus replied without hesitation. "You're clearly one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. You wield absolute power over a galactic empire, and yet you took time to personally explain engineering principles to a primitive alien you could have ignored entirely. That suggests depths to your character that intrigue me." His honesty was as disarming as his smile. When had anyone last spoken to her with such genuine interest in her as a person, rather than as a source of authority or threat? "And because," Marcus continued, his voice growing softer, "there's something about you that feels familiar, even though we've never met before. I can't explain it, but being around you feels right, somehow." Zarathek's breath caught. He was describing exactly what she was experiencing. The impossible sense of recognition and compatibility that her genetic programming was screaming at her to acknowledge. "That is unexpected," she managed. "For me too," Marcus admitted. "I came here expecting to meet alien dignitaries and establish formal diplomatic relations. I didn't expect to meet someone who would challenge everything I thought I knew about leadership, intelligence, and—" He hesitated, clearly struggling with concepts he couldn't quite articulate. "And compatibility, I suppose." The word hung between them like a bridge neither of them was quite ready to cross. But the fact that he had used it, that he was experiencing the same impossible recognition she was feeling, changed everything about their situation. The word compatibility echoed between them like a challenge to the natural order of the galaxy. Zarathek felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of what was possible. Not just politically or diplomatically, but biologically and personally. This human was experiencing the same impossible recognition she was feeling, which meant either they were both deluding themselves, or something genuinely unprecedented was occurring. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming priority message from Dr. Kelvara. The timing was perfect and terrible, offering answers she desperately needed, while interrupting a moment that was redefining her entire worldview. "I need to respond to this," she said, her voice carrying uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Would you prefer that I take this communication privately?" Marcus tilted his head, studying her expression with that unsettling intuition of his. "If it concerns me or my presence here, I'd rather know about it directly. I've found that misunderstandings usually come from lack of information, rather than too much of it." Another example of his refreshing directness. Most beings who dealt with her either assumed they had no right to information or demanded it as a matter of pride. Marcus simply stated his preference and waited for her decision, trusting her judgment while making his own position clear. She activated the communication link, and Dr. Kelvara's image appeared in holographic form above the room's central projector. The elderly geneticist's expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes held the excitement of someone who had discovered something remarkable. "Alpha Matriarch, I have completed the preliminary analysis you requested. The results are unprecedented." "Proceed," Zarathek commanded, though her voice carried less authority than usual. Marcus moved closer, clearly interested in whatever scientific discussion was about to unfold. Human and Moonborn genetic structures are far more compatible than initial scans suggested. While our species clearly evolved along different pathways, we share several fundamental genetic markers that appear to be universal constants for intelligent life. More significantly, human genetic material contains adaptive sequences that could theoretically complement Moonborn reproductive requirements. Zarathek felt her breath catch. Explain complement, in specific terms, Doctor. Dr. Kelvara's expression grew more serious. Alpha Matriarch, based on my analysis, human genetic material contains precisely the adaptive flexibility that Alpha Matriarch bloodlines require for successful reproduction. The human captain's genetic profile suggests that offspring from such a pairing would not only be viable, but would likely express enhanced versions of traditional alpha traits. The implications hit like a physical blow. For 4 centuries, alpha matriarchs had struggled to find males strong enough to survive the mating process and produce viable heirs. Most attempts failed because moonborn males, despite their strength and aggression, lacked the genetic adaptability required to successfully bond with alpha genetics. But this human, this impossible primitive from a species she had never heard of, possessed exactly what her lineage required. Are you saying? Marcus interjected, his voice carefully controlled. That our species could actually interbreed successfully? Dr. Kelvara nodded gravely. Not only successfully, Captain Chen, but optimally. Your genetic profile contains adaptive sequences that appear specifically designed to complement alpha matriarch requirements. The probability of successful reproduction between your genetic line and the alpha matriarchs is approximately 97%. The silence that followed was deafening. Zarathek found herself staring at Marcus, with new understanding of what her body had been trying to tell her. Her genetic programming hadn't been malfunctioning when it identified him as a compatible mate. It had been recognizing something her conscious mind couldn't process. This human was quite literally the perfect genetic partner for her bloodline. Marcus was looking at her with an expression that combined wonder, confusion, and something that might have been hope. That explains a lot, actually. I've been feeling like I've known you forever, even though we just met, and there's something about being near you that feels more right than anything I've ever experienced. The compatibility markers would create strong psychological and physiological responses in both parties. Dr. Kelvara confirmed. Captain Chen, you would experience the human equivalent of alpha recognition. Alpha matriarch. Your reproductive programming would identify him as an optimal genetic partner and respond accordingly. Zarathek tried to process this information logically, but her enhanced nervous system was too busy celebrating the confirmation of what it had been telling her since Marcus first arrived. Every instinct she possessed was screaming that this was the mate she had been waiting for her entire life. Doctor, she said, fighting to maintain some semblance of official composure. What would be the practical requirements for such a pairing? The human would need to survive the bonding process, which traditionally has been the limiting factor in alpha reproductions. However, Captain Chen's genetic profile suggests unusual resilience and adaptability. His survival probability would be significantly higher than any moonborn male we have evaluated. Marcus was watching this discussion with obvious fascination and growing alarm. Excuse me, but when you say, survive the bonding process, what exactly are we talking about? Because that phrasing suggests it's normally fatal. Alpha matriarch physiology during reproductive cycles becomes intense. Dr. Kelvara explained diplomatically. Most males cannot withstand the physical and psychological demands of bonding with an alpha. Historically, survival rates have been approximately 30%. 30%, Marcus repeated slowly. And you think my survival odds would be better? Oh. Significantly better. Your genetic adaptability markers suggest survival probability in excess of 80%. Captain Chen, your species appears to have evolved specifically to complement alpha matriarch genetics, despite the impossibility of prior contact between our peoples. Zarathek watched Marcus process this information, expecting fear or at least serious concern about the survival statistics. Instead, she saw him consider the data with the same systematic approach he had applied to her engineering schematics. Dr. Kelvara, he said finally, is there any evolutionary precedent for this kind of cross-species compatibility? Because the odds against it happening by chance seem astronomical. You are correct, Captain. This level of genetic harmony typically only occurs between species that share common evolutionary ancestry. The fact that humans and Moonborn have developed compatible reproductive systems, despite evolving in complete isolation, suggests either remarkable coincidence or some form of directed evolution. The implications of directed evolution hung in the air, like a challenge to everything they thought they understood about their respective species' origins. But Marcus was already moving past the philosophical implications to more practical concerns. "Alpha Matriarch," he said, turning to face her directly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Setting aside the genetic compatibility and the political implications, do you actually want this? Because if we're talking about a potential relationship, it should be based on more than just optimal breeding statistics." The question was so fundamentally human, so focused on personal choice and emotional truth, rather than political advantage or genetic necessity, that it stopped her entirely. When had anyone last asked what she actually wanted rather than what was expected of her? She began, then stopped. How could she explain that being near him felt like coming home to a place she had never been? How could she describe the sense of recognition that went beyond genetics to something deeper and more personal? "Captain Chen," she said carefully, "since you arrived, I have experienced responses I did not know were possible. You treat me as an equal worthy of respect rather than a superior demanding submission. You engage with my intelligence rather than simply acknowledging my authority. And your presence triggers feelings I have never experienced before." "Same here," Marcus admitted. "I came here expecting to meet alien dignitaries and establish diplomatic relations. I didn't expect to meet someone who would challenge everything I thought I knew about leadership, intelligence, and what it means to find someone who truly understands you." Dr. Kelvara cleared her throat diplomatically. "If I may observe, Alpha Matriarch, this level of personal and genetic compatibility is unprecedented in Alpha Matriarch history. The potential benefits to the bloodline and the Empire would be enormous." "And what about the potential benefits to the individuals involved?" Marcus asked pointedly. "Because if this is going to work, it has to be based on what we want as people, not just what our genetics suggest or what our governments might prefer." Zarathek found herself smiling, a genuine expression of warmth that felt foreign but natural on her features. This impossible human was concerned about her personal happiness in a situation that could reshape galactic politics. His priorities were so completely contrary to everything she had experienced that it was simultaneously refreshing and disorienting. "Dr. Kelvara, thank you for your analysis. Please prepare detailed compatibility protocols and genetic projection models. I want complete information before we proceed." "Of course, Alpha Matriarch. Should I also prepare formal bonding ceremony specifications?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that would affect not just their personal lives but the future of both their species. Zarathek looked at Marcus, this remarkable human who had walked into her empire and changed everything simply by being himself. "Not yet, Doctor. Captain Chen and I have much to discuss before we make any formal decisions." After Dr. Kelvara disconnected, they stood in silence for several moments, each processing the magnitude of what they had just learned. Finally, Marcus spoke. "So," he said, with that warm smile that had been dismantling her defenses since they first met, "would it be presumptuous of me to suggest that this first contact mission has developed some unexpected complications?" Zarathek laughed, a sound she hadn't made in years. "Captain Chen, you have managed to accomplish something that 17 suitors with formal courtship protocols could not. You have captured the interest of the Alpha Matriarch of the Moonborn Empire, without even trying." "Good," Marcus replied, stepping closer. "Because you've captured mine too. And I have the feeling this is just the beginning of something remarkable." As he moved within arm's reach, his scent overwhelmed her enhanced senses with waves of compatibility and recognition that made her genetic programming sing with satisfaction. For the first time in her life, Alpha Matriarch Zarathek was experiencing what it felt like to find a true equal. "Captain Chen," she said softly, "when you volunteered for this mission, did you expect to completely redefine the future of galactic civilization?" "Not really," Marcus admitted, reaching out to carefully take her hand in his much smaller ones. But I'm starting to think that the best things in life usually come from being brave enough to explore the unknown. As their hands touched, Zarathek felt the final pieces of an impossible puzzle click into place. This human, this remarkable being who treated her as an equal and challenged her to be more than just her role, was exactly what she had been waiting for without knowing it. The genetic compatibility was remarkable, but the personal connection was what made it meaningful. "Then let us explore it together," she said, intertwining their fingers. "But I should warn you, Captain. Courtship customs among the Alpha Matriarchs can be quite intense." Marcus grinned, apparently unintimidated by the prospect. "Your Imperial Majesty, I flew across half the galaxy in a primitive ship to have this conversation. I think I can handle whatever comes next." Looking into his forward-facing eyes, bright with intelligence and warm with genuine affection, Zarathek realized that her search for a worthy mate had ended not with conquest or submission, but with recognition and choice. This impossible human had done what no other being in the galaxy had managed. He had found a way to be strong enough to stand beside her as an equal. Outside the guest quarters, the Moonborn Empire continued its ancient patterns of dominance and submission. But inside, an Alpha Matriarch and a human pilot were quietly rewriting the rules of what was possible between equals who chose each other freely. The galaxy would never be quite the same.